Hello, and thank you everyone for joining me. My name is Casey Ross. I am the Director of Energy Services at Lorax Partnerships, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Maryland Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022 and how it is a major piece of climate legislation that will affect the building sector in a large way. The Climate Solutions Now Act is Maryland's net zero attempt. It has four main arms: transportation, utilities, and social justice and buildings. Most of this presentation will be talking about the building sector with a little bit of touch on the other three and how they all interact. To start with, on the utility side, Maryland is using this legislation to fund large-scale changes to how our electricity grid is provided with clean electricity. The current makeup of electricity grid is about 50% clean energy, which is carbon-free energy, and 50% fossil fuel-based energy sources. So this legislation is putting a lot of stimulus to creating solar farms and also offshore wind power to increase Maryland's percentage of renewables in the grid. Another arm of this is in terms of promoting electrification of vehicles. So all throughout municipalities throughout Maryland are receiving stimulus and incentives for electrification of their vehicles. Of note is Frostburg Police Department and Montgomery County Public Schools. Montgomery County currently has the largest electric school bus fleet in the country, putting Maryland as a leader in that realm. And then lastly, before we get into the building sector, there is a whole nother arm of Climate Solutions Now Act, which is focused on low and moderate income housing, funding and support with working with green banks and local utilities to fund individual households to be able to provide for renewable energy and also energy efficiency and decarbonization efforts. So the main thrust of the building sector is the Building Energy Performance Standard, sometimes known as the BEPS. It has two main arms or two main goals. First, to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are generated on site by large buildings. That's principally by fossil fuel burning boilers, natural gas boilers. And the second is to flatten the curve in terms of electrical peak demand. As we move our buildings away from gas heat into electric heat, we want to make sure that efficiencies and offsets come into play as well, so that the electrical grid distribution and infrastructure doesn't get overwhelmed. The calculations that the group that has put this together have provided show that the efforts here on Climate Solutions Now Act will give us a 6% reduction in peak electrical demand by the year 2045, as opposed to a 24% increase if we don't do these efficiency measures. Maryland's not the only area that has a BEPS program. Montgomery County in Maryland already has one, as well as neighboring DC. And throughout the country, we're seeing BEPS program being unrolled everywhere. This is a snapshot of every BEPS program that is either in place or on the ballots for 2024. There are some exempt buildings. All buildings, the BEPS program covers buildings that are 35,000 square feet and larger, except for commercial kitchens, because they have too reliant on natural gas, historic buildings, because they're too difficult to renovate and preserve their historic character, manufacturing and agriculture, and other hard to decarbonize sectors, and K-12 schools. K-12 schools are a little bit of an exception. They are not, because they are government funded, I think is a piece of this, and they are not in this requirement, but there is the K-12 carrot, where this Climate Solutions Now Act provides an additional 5% of state funding if the buildings go net zero. And we're starting to see net zero elementary and middle schools in Maryland today. This is a snapshot of one of them in eastern Baltimore. Goals and timeline for the Climate Solutions Now Act. It was passed in April of 2022, and the BEPS plan was put out in December of 2023. What we're going to be seeing coming up soon is metering, then after that compliance periods, and finally for our end goal of covered buildings covered by this legislation of zero direct carbon by 2040 to do the entire statewide goal of net zero carbon by 2045. like the first of our milestones that are coming up on the timeline is metering and monitoring. So all of the covered buildings, 35,000 square feet and larger, in June of 2025, will need to send in their utility bills, natural gas, electricity, to the Maryland Department of the Environment through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We'll have 5 years of recording to establish baselines and performance metrics before the 2030 deadline, where compliance requirements start to kick in. Here's the schedule of compliance requirements. In 2030, buildings will all be required to meet a certain amount of kilograms of CO2 directly burned on their site per square foot. This is broken down by building type. The full chart is about 3 pages long, so this is really just a snapshot here. At 2035, that limit gets halved, and then at 2040, that limit is zero. So that is saying by 2040, buildings covered by this BEPS program will need to have zero carbon directly burned on site, or else face penalties. Also by 2040, we're going to have EUI standards. That is an energy use intensity, and that is accounting for both direct natural gas and fossil fuel energy, as well as electricity. So this is where the efficiency comes into play, and that all of these buildings will be required to pare down their total amount of energy use to keep us all efficient. When this program was first being developed, a survey of all the buildings in the state of Maryland was done to see which ones are under this program and how they would fare. So there's about 9,000 buildings in the state which qualify. Of those, 30% of them meet the greenhouse gas requirements by 2040, and another different 30% meet the total energy, the EUI requirements by 2040. Small sliver do both and escape. But that means 90% of the buildings that are under this program, so buildings 35,000 square feet and larger, will have to make some sort of change to adhere to these standards. So the alternate compliance, the buildings that do not adhere to the standards and fail to meet these carbon and energy emissions goals or metrics will face severe financial penalties. It starts at $230 per metric ton of CO2 that is in excess, that is going to be adjusted for inflation to $2020. And then that number ratchets up another $4 per ton every year thereafter. This number is approximately what the going rate on the market is for direct carbon capture. Some of the logic here is that if large buildings are going to put CO2 into the atmosphere, they also need to pull it out. Here's a case study of what this really looks like in a real building. This is a strip mall in Essex, Maryland. As of a couple of weeks ago, at least, was for sale. So I have some numbers from it, and that's where I got it. I don't know their exact utility bills, but it was built in 1963. So it's probably going to be worse than an average building built now. And we do know what the performances of average retail buildings are now, because Energy Star tracks that. Making an assumption that this is at least 15% worse in performance than an Energy Star average retail space, we're able to come up with some rough numbers in terms of energy use and also carbon equivalent for direct natural gas burning. From these metrics, we're seeing that Climate Solutions Now Act will not place any penalty into this building at 2030. And by 2035, we will start seeing penalties for greenhouse gases. And then by 2040, we'll start to see penalties for greenhouse gases increase, as well as penalties for overages on total energy use on the EUI. By 2040, we're expecting that these numbers shake out to about 53 cents per square foot, which for this building is $35,000 a year. And that increases every year. So what can you do? There's a lot of doom and gloom that was here, a lot of scary things. So what the idea is that you need to start planning now. Because of the nature and the duration of construction, things take some time. You should really start looking at decarbonization, sustainability plans, all net zero energy, renewable energy on site, all of these things to get your building in line with compliance. Once you've already got your building in line with compliance, then you should also start planning to look at incentives and rebates to help support the funding of those actions to bring a little bit more carrot to the stick. Heat pumps are going to be a major component of the future of buildings, driven in large part because of this legislation. Heat pumps will be a energy efficient and cost efficient way of heating buildings in lieu of fossil fuel and natural gas. The heat pumps of today are just better than the heat pumps of a generation ago. They are able to produce hotter air and water temperatures, and they're able to operate in lower, colder climates. Heat pumps in Canada are very common. They also use lower greenhouse gas equivalent refrigerants, so they're overall less polluting to the environment. We will also be seeing a surge of magnetic induction cooking. So this is an electric option for cooking ranges in lieu of natural gas burners. They're not like the old 1960s electric resistance burner that would glow red and take forever and just be very unreliable. It's a much more energy efficient way of heating. It uses magnetic fields to heat the pans directly, so it doesn't heat the air, and it does so very safely as well. Because it only interacts with the pan, you can put your hand right onto the surface of that, or maybe your child's hand right onto the surface of that, and it's cool to the touch. In terms of incentives, there is a lot in the market right now, and especially for our area. So in terms of residential buildings from single family all the way up through multifamily, there is a federal 45L tax rebate. This can, tax credit. This can be up to $2,000 per dwelling unit or $5,000 per unit if prevailing wages, such as a HUD project, is in the mix. What makes a good candidate for this is a building that has a decent envelope, above code minimum, but not crazy HVAC efficiency, a heat pump hot water heater, and Energy Star rated appliances. All those together with some certifications get this tax credit to you. On the commercial side, there's the federal 179D tax deduction program. This program has been out for a very long time, but only been recently energized with a lot of funding through the Inflation Reduction Act. This uses a whole building energy model against a ASHRAE 90.1 baseline to get a tax deduction of approximately $1 per square foot. Or if you're, again, with a prevailing wage project, such as union labor or a HUD project, that bumps up to $5 per square foot. If you have a building that is energy efficient because you're avoiding the penalties associated with Climate Solutions Now Act, go ahead, reach out to your folks and get a whole building energy model to get your 179D tax deductions and help pay for some of that. If you've already got the energy model done, do another one that is a little bit different and start talking to your energy modeler about making a BG&E or Pepco energy rebate program. They have similar programs right now. Again, a lot of money from Inflation Reduction Act is going into this, and the incentives here are on a purely kilowatt hour saved basis. So there's a lot of nuances here, but anecdotally, we tend to see about $1 per square foot saved through these utility rebate programs for both commercial and residential buildings. It's 28 cents per kilowatt hour, $1 safe, and the rebate provided by BG&E and Pepco is a direct check, so it is not a tax incentive, and it goes right to the building owner. And then lastly, if you have this energy model already done, you're halfway to the finish line in terms of getting a LEED or NGBS tax incentive. By making your building LEED or NGBS certified, and you're in one of these areas that offers tax incentives, you can get the taxes, your local property taxes from these jurisdictions reduced significantly. These percentages are tax reductions generally in a 3 to 4 year range. It's kind of dependent on the area. All right. Thank you very much.
Casey, you got the assignment. Thank you, sir.
Great.
I appreciate it. You did a great job. There are a few things you talked about that I wasn't aware of, and I love your perspective on this because I love to hear different people's perspectives about how they break this down. So one of them was, I never understood why K through 12 schools were exempt from the BEPS and the Climate Solutions Now Act, but it's good to know there is an incentive if they do decide to go net zero.
Yeah, yeah. And usually it's 5% of state funding, which is not the entire pot of money.
Hmm.
But usually that's enough to pay for the conduit and panels of a solar.
Mm.
So it's enough to tip the scales and you really like make it like this is the smart financial thing to do.
Sure, sure. You also touched upon the case study in Essex. I
Yeah.
would love to see a case study for like an office building.
Oh,
Uh,
sure, sure,
I don't know
sure.
if you have one or
Not at my
if one.
fingertips, but I can pull one together for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be very interesting to see what the penalties are there. But overall, you did a great job. I really appreciate
Good.
you making time. We'll leave it here for now, and thank you again.
Oh, awesome. Take care, Aaron. Have a good
All
one.
right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.